So first and foremost, I'd like to just thank you all for tuning in. This is a super important discussion, and I'm really happy that folks are giving up a few hours on their Saturday to stay with us and tune in. Additionally, I hope everyone's staying healthy and well during these wild times. It's certainly an interesting time for all of us, but even more so in the migraine community and folks living with other conditions. This can be a real challenge within the healthcare realm. And so, yeah, the introduction was great, and I probably don't even need to elaborate more on it because that basically is my life story. But I guess I'll just start a little bit with what life was like growing up for me. You know, I grew up a normal kid, just played sports, friends, things like that. And in high school is really when my sister Melissa's migraine disease took off. And I'll preface this with saying that I wish I could be the saint. I wish I could be the hero. You know, and sometimes folks maybe get that idea with what I do now that, you know, I'm such an awesome guy. But really at that time in my life, I felt like I had a tough time recognizing the severity of my sister's disease. And I'm sure many of you who struggle with migraine can relate. It's hard when friends don't get why you can't, you know, work a certain job, or if, you know, you have to cancel plans last minute, if you're having a flare up or an episode. And those were things that took me, you know, a long time to sort of grasp. And I think I have a better understanding and more empathy towards folks. Unfortunately, it took losing my sister to this disease to really have that. But I just remember in high school, I really struggled with, you know, how could my sister be so joyous and outgoing and, you know, funny on some days. And then there were days and weeks and months where she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't hold a job. She had to, you know, withdraw from school and all of those things. And that really, it was challenging. And as a, you know, a young man kind of growing into himself, a lot of the family's focus was on my sister. And I feel like that's something that's tough, you know, as you're trying to find your own identity. There's the sibling rivalry and jealousy. And, you know, with a lot of the focus on my sister, maybe there's at times resentment with how, you know, my mom has to go to hospital after hospital after hospital. And that just really proves how difficult this disease is, and how much it affects not only the individual struggling with the disease, but also, you know, their circle, their family, their caregivers, etc. And so after watching my sister progressively get worse and struggle more and more with migraine, unfortunately, like was mentioned in the introduction, she died by suicide in June 2013. That was just a few short weeks after I had graduated high school. I was excited. I was going to college in the fall, and I was getting the opportunity to play hockey again. And so that really sort of rocked my world. And in those weeks after, I wrestled with, you know, what could I do to ensure that folks wouldn't have to feel the things that my family had to endure and feel. And it sort of happened, and I wish I could, you know, tell you why it was, or why I felt that I had this urge to pursue this path. But at the heart of it was just that I knew that I wanted to use my story and my pain, and my sister's story and my family story to try to make a difference. And I didn't quite know what shape or form that would take. And that's really been refined, and I've pursued a few different avenues now, and I'll get into those in a bit. But at the heart of it was just the desire to connect and to really utilize that story, and try to ease the pain of another. And so following that, it started with just sharing the story, right? Especially anything with migraine could be considered an invisible disease, right? You can't see it, but that's also not true, because if folks are really struggling, there are certain symptoms and side effects of medication that are visible. But in general, you know, folks just can't get it. It's not a broken arm, they can't see it. And that's very similar to mental health. And so I really just wanted to be vocal and share that story, and share how migraine ultimately, you know, led to my sister's suicide. And even to just talk about suicide, there's such a stigma regarding mental health and suicide that folks don't talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, these are the things that'll continue to live in perpetuity forever. And so I just wanted to be vocal and share that story with basically who would ever listen. And so that led me into college, and I was trying to work through that transition, and as well as sort of carrying the weight of the grief that lived for months and years to follow. And I didn't really have a desire. I didn't really have a career path in mind at that time. I was just a normal kid, kind of trying to figure it out as I went along. And probably at some point in my freshman year, I ultimately decided that I would want to pursue sort of a social work degree, and really at that time was more of a focus on mental health and suicide prevention. And that's really where my first foray into the advocacy and stuff was more in mental health suicide prevention. I always left it to my mother and my other family members to kind of really hone in on the migraine aspect, and I was more focused on suicide and mental health. And that ultimately led me to doing an internship with a mental health nonprofit, where I learned so much just about how to share our stories and how to try to use them for good, and what are some healthy ways and what are some unhealthy ways of sharing. And so I was still in my junior year of college, thinking that I would be really focusing on a mental health career. I thought I'd be maybe a therapist or a counselor or any of those. And then in my junior year, I had a professor in a social policies course explain that, you can be the best therapist in the whole world, best doctor in the whole world, and you're going to help a lot of people, maybe a few hundred, very deeply. But if you want to create change for millions of folks, one of the best ways to do it is to have a seat at the table, and to sort of amplify your voice and the voice of your community, and try to, get meaningful legislation passed. And that was a huge change in my life, where I really decided I would want to pursue something more in the policy or political realm, while still remaining true to my background of a social worker and a mental health focused on migraine disease, et cetera. And so that's really when I started fine-tuning what I want to do career-wise, and also how to best advocate. And I've been fortunate enough to do quite a few different things in that. And still, I think for a long time, it was shouting from the rooftops and hoping someone would listen of my story. It included some writing and former speeches and things like that. But it also included some great opportunities, such as Headache on the Hill, where I got to join a lot of great fellow migraine sufferers and their caregivers and doctors. And we lobbied the Hill and members of Congress and tried to pass meaningful legislation. And that really ties in with what I do now, but it didn't start with that. And something I think that I learned early on in this, as early as my freshman year of college, was that just because I've had a unique set of circumstances doesn't mean that other folks won't get it. And I think that when my pain was really open and I was honest and, I was vulnerable, I realized that not only could my pain be sort of a passage for other folks to share their pain, and it didn't have to look alike, it could be different. We all sort of go through our own life challenges and experiences, but just being able to be open and honest, I think, with whatever you're going through in your story is so valuable. And that's what I found early on. And so that would be sort of one of my takeaways. I would encourage you to be vulnerable with the folks in your community, be open and share. And that's what I love so much about the migraine community is, although we're all spread out all over the country, and some folks can only really meet virtually, especially before the pandemic, there's still such a great community, and they're active, and they provide support and recommendations and advice to one another. And that's really a beautiful thing. And so kind of leaning off that, something I would also caution against, and this was really, really valuable to me as I pursued, into graduate school with social work and things like that, was, while I think vulnerability can be one of the most powerful things, especially within advocacy and advocating for yourself on a small level, or advocating for legislation and policy, I think it's really important how we share our stories, and who we share them with, right? Not everyone needs to be invited into our story. Not everyone needs to hear the nuanced details, right? Like we can really have a select group that gets the full story, and then we can also have the larger story that we share with our wider community or the general public. And maybe that sounds a little hypocritical, as I proclaim to you all now, but that's something that I didn't quite get at first. And I see it a lot with folks who struggle with an invisible illness, or migraine, depression, anxiety, things like that, is that you feel like nobody gets it. And so then if you eventually get to the point where you find someone who gets it, or you find a community online who gets it, you've held it in so long, you just want to pour it out. You want to just tell everybody your whole life story, without having like a meaningful relationship. And I think that at times can be super valuable and super important, but I also think it leads for mixed expectations. And I know even in some of the migraine groups online, right, like folks have to say that the moderators are not at all times like your doctor. They're not your therapist, they're not your counselor. And so it's really a fine line to walk between being vulnerable and open and honest, which is incredibly helpful, and also just sort of dumping whatever you're feeling and projecting that onto another person, and hoping that they have the tools and skills to really reciprocate that and work through those issues with you. So then just going, I guess, into more of like the advocacy realm of things, I think that folks get this idea, right, that I can't be an advocate. I'm struggling with this disease. It's taking most of my energy just to make it through the day, to get my groceries, to do my laundry, to things like that. It's hard for me to get out of bed. And I would say that, you don't have to drop your life, work for a member of Congress, move to DC, whatever. You don't have to join a nonprofit and work every day, 9 to 5 in that realm. It can really start small as just your family, and your friends, and setting boundaries around your disease, and advocating for yourself, and making it clear that, this is something that I'm living with every day. And, I'm going to have good days, I'm going to have bad days, and setting those boundaries. And that, I hope you're here with me for the journey, but I'm not always going to be my best self, and I'm going to have some really tough days. And I think that's really a great place to start, if you can just be open and honest with those folks directly in your life. And then I think it goes, and this is something that I really wrestled with following my sister's death, is that, I wish the medical community, right, would have understood. And we've come a ways since 2013. There are some promising options, and each folks, I'm not here to give medical advice. And I don't think anyone should, besides, your primary doctor and your specialist. But I wish that the community could get it, right? And so that was something that I think, as a patient, it's your responsibility to really let your medical team know your symptoms, and advocate for yourself, because the system's big, and it's easy to just be another cog in the machine and get lost in the process. But I think it's super important to hopefully have a doctor that recognizes the severity of the disease and has some understanding. And I've met a lot of great ones in the last few years, but also to just be your own advocate, your own champion for your condition. Don't be afraid to tell them what it is, and really stick up for yourself. Because we hear too many stories, all the time, about folks having terrible experiences within this community. And that's not to shame anyone. That's just to say that we have a lot of work to do, and it's important to just be an advocate. And then following that, I would say that if you do want to get involved with advocacy and sharing your story at more of like a legislative level, or just to a broader community, first and foremost, I would say, it's your story, and that's what matters. And that's what makes the difference. It's not that, it's great when an organization writes this very nice letter supporting a bill that would, increase access to a certain medication, or, improve funding for the NIH. But it's really, really valuable, especially in my role now working for a member of Congress, when a group of folks come to me and they say, like, this is my story. Like, my brother struggles with X, Y, and Z. My dad struggles with X, Y, and Z. This is how this legislation has impacted me in a negative way or could impact me in a positive way. And so you don't have to jump on a plane and come sit in our office. But I will encourage you to start small, right? Like you can start small in your community, but you can also just pick up the phone and call your representative, state, local, or federal, and just share with them that, there's this issue and it's affecting me on a deeply personal level, and I'd love you to take a look at it. And I can assure you, we review all calls, all correspondence that comes in, and we share that with the Congresswoman and try to discuss that and see how we can incorporate that into our work. But I will sort of advise that the more personal that your story is, and the more you share the direct implications of any policy or legislation in your own life, the better, because a form letter is great. And, they're well written and they get straight to the point, but it's really those stories that stick with members. There's thousands of pieces of legislation moving all the time. It's incredibly difficult to get anything through. But members really will carry those individual stories of the challenges that folks have experienced in their district. And then next time they see that bill, or they're, thinking, how can we introduce something to make a difference? They'll remember and they'll say, oh, Billy shared that really moving story about, his experience and the challenges that he sort of saw growing up, and with his sister and his family. And so that goes a long way with sticking with folks. And I guess, that's basically where I'd like to just open it up for questions. I want this to be sort of as informal as possible. That my main takeaway, which I would love for you all to get, is that, you don't have to come on here and spend 20 minutes sharing your story. Really find those folks in your community who you feel like you can be open with. And if you feel like you don't have any, you're certainly more than welcome to, reach out to me, and other folks in here, I would say, probably feel the same way. But really just try to take those emotions and recognize that you're not alone. There's a huge community. Millions of folks struggle with migraine. It's a terrible, terrible disease, but it's also, opened us up and been able to find a really good community. And I'm super thankful every time that I get to work with Miles for Migraine and share a bit of my family's story, or, when I get to go to Headache on the Hill. And now I'm on the opposite side of things, where when, if the world ever opens up and folks can come to Washington, D.C., I will gladly sit across the table with you and listen to your stories. And that's what's really, I'm really passionate about and appreciative of, is the fact that, 2.5 years ago was the first time I think I went to Headache on the Hill. And I remember just feeling so encouraged by that movement and getting that group of people to contact so many members, and the organizers do a great job of ensuring that you're meeting with members and staff, and like people recognize, like they know, like, oh, those are those migraine folks, and we're loud and we're proud and we do a great job. And now I'm super excited to sort of be on the other side, and I can't wait for you all to come visit, and we'll make some progress and see what we can get done to help this community.
Great, thanks so much, Billy. I attended a Headache on the Hill last year this year, really, it feels like last year, for the first time, and it was amazing. I was really nervous about it, but when I got there, the first day of the training day, I was nervous, but the day that I was there, it was just, I was blown away. It was such an exciting day. I felt so important. I felt so it was great.
It's empowering, right? Like that's what's so great about when we're able to take something deeply personal to us, and something that we struggle with, and we can communicate that to important people, and hope that our individual stories and our collective stories can really contribute to making a change. And there's a lot of cynicism regarding politics, and a lot of it's for good reason. But at the end of the day, I can assure you that most of the folks who are here really do care. And although they'll have different ways of doing things. They do care about improving outcomes for folks. And I think something like migraine is really, it's not a partisan issue, right? Like, so many folks struggle that probably, even if you don't know anyone, I mean, you all, I'm sure, know folks, but even if someone thinks they don't know someone who struggles with the disease, it's more than likely due to the numbers and the statistics that they probably do. And so that's, yeah, it's like one of those things that I think we can all really rally behind. And that's another one of the kind of unfortunate challenges of this disease, is like, it doesn't get as much recognition as some of the other major health issues that receive a lot of attention. And so that's why I love that we're out there fighting all the time, and the community's really pushing for recognition that they so rightly deserve.
Right. And the one thing we were told is, when you get in front of your legislators and senators, you probably will get 5 minutes with them.
Yeah.
And each of my my 3 meetings, I got a half hour to an hour with each.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know, they wanted to learn, they wanted to hear our stories. So the one thing you did mention when you were talking was to have, basically you said 2 stories. And we talk about having an elevator story, short story, and having your longer story for your family and friends.
Right.
You touched on that, and so I wanted to touch on it again. We call it in our support groups an elevator story, short one you can tell quickly to people, and a long one. So that's really important to folks to have.
Yeah, and that's something that it took me years to kind of figure out, right? Because especially now, anytime you know that there's a tragedy, right, like suicide, for example, folks say, like, please reach out, please share. And that's so valuable. These are things that live in the shadows, and not enough people are talking about them. But at the same time, it's really, really important that you have some proper boundaries with yourself, and you respect yourself enough to know that, like, okay, maybe this person I just met 5 minutes ago, they don't need to know the darkest places I've ever been. Maybe they can know, you know, how I've had these challenges, but they don't need to necessarily know all of the details.
Right.
And that took me. I'm not perfect in any regard. I wrestled with that super deeply. Like I said, for those first few months and years, I felt like I was just screaming from the rooftops, anyone that would listen, this is my story, you know. And that's something that I really worked back on. And now I try to present it from a place of, rather than like, hear my pain, you know, listen to me, please. Now it's more of looking reflectively and saying, you know, how can I walk someone else through this? How can I provide hope from someone from a much better place in my life now, where I feel comfortable and confident sharing my story effectively and in an appropriate setting.
Right. Someone wanted to know, is a phone call with your story or a written note better to get your story to a writer?
Both, actually. As long as they're personal, right? Like, I can tell you, and that's sort of what my job is now in DC, is sifting through a lot of the correspondence we receive, and we get a ton, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of letters and thousands of phone calls all the time. And either is effective. What I would just say is really, like, make it true to you. And those form letters, like I said, you know, I've been a part of the other side of, like, trying to craft those and making them as effective as possible. But we get so many of those from all different issues. But I really love when it's someone calls and they say, like, for example, earlier this week, I got a call, someone talking about ALS. And they explain that, you know, someone they deeply love and care about is struggling. And that's why they urge my boss to support this legislation. And I think when you can tie it in that way with something deeply personal, regardless of the medium, that's a super effective way to get recognized and stand out from the crowd.
Great, thank you. Someone wanted to know how they can contact you.
Yeah, I'm all over the place on Facebook, and I'd be glad to, you know, share a number or email as well. I don't know how that's working with this whole thing, but if you search for William Dwyer on Facebook, you'll probably see me, and we'll probably have a lot of mutual migraine friends, and always sort of chiming in with my latest happenings on there, and glad to share.
Okay, great. How would you suggest that someone with migraine prepare for an event such as Headache on the Hill who has no experience?
Yeah. First and foremost, and I think that's what the organizers do a great job of, is they say, like really take care of yourself, especially when folks are traveling long distances and, they're in a new environment and they may be triggered by scents or sounds or lights that they're not familiar with. You're not going to be effective, and you're not going to have a good time if you're just feeling like crap the whole time. So really find what works for you and sort of managing a lot of the potential triggers or symptoms that you may experience and try to focus on that. But then I would also say, yeah, just like you said, it's super nerve wracking. Don't be too hard on yourself. You don't have to be a professional. Like I said, it's a basic sort of communication, and most offices won't have a super detailed understanding. Like, you're the expert. You live with it. We're not the experts on a lot of things. We have folks who try to be, and we're working really hard to ensure that we have some educated takes and make our work as meaningful as possible. But ultimately, the folks who are living with this condition and the doctors and the medical professionals, they're the experts. And so chances are we're going to be there, like you said, asking questions to you, wanting to learn more. We're not going to be rude or, in your face about things if you don't know certain legislative terms. We're really just there to learn from you and how we can incorporate that into our work.
Right. Yeah. Most of the ones I met with didn't even get it, didn't even understand. Mm-hmm. And, when I said I have chronic migraine, they said, you have a migraine right now? I said, oh, yeah, I've had one for 13 years straight, 365. They said, oh, well. So, yeah, it's great. But so anyway, I think that is it on the questions. But the last comments are, I wanted to personally say you are a hero.
I appreciate that.
Definitely. And your sister, Melissa, as many people have said, is smiling down on you. We all want to thank you so much for speaking for her, about her. And we just really enjoy your story and what you're doing. And we all, I know, on this Zoom call today, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for what you're doing. We just, you're wonderful. You're a wonderful person, brother. And we thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And like I said, I'm no special person. I just really connect deeply to this. And that's what I always say, every time I get to do this, it's carrying my sister's story forward and ensuring that her voice isn't lost, and that we use it to make sure that the rest of the migraine community feels heard and valued. And so we don't have to, go through this tragic event again. So I appreciate jumping on, and I'm glad to learn and live with you all.
Thank you very much.